So, you watched the entirety of the 4th season of Stranger Things, and if you watched the previous seasons of this magnificent show, like you should have, there was one thing that kept nagging you in the back of your mind, wasn't there? That's right, where the hell was the mindflayer this season? Now, I realize that we still have a few episodes left that we'll get to see in July, but the 7th episode, called The Massacre at Hawkins' Lab, really goes in depth on explaining the main villain of the 4th season, known as Vecna. And before I continue, here's a giant spoiler warning in case you haven't caught up to this point in the show so far. You've been warned. So in this episode, as Eleven is reliving her past through the Nina project, we learn that one of the assistants to Dr. Brenner, the very assistant that was shown to care for Eleven in the past, is actually the first individual that Dr. Brenner took under his wing, thereby making him the almost mythical number 1. We also learn that one's real name is Henry Creel, who was also one of the children of the convicted murderer Victor Creel, who was also innocent of his family's murder, as we are shown that Henry was in fact the one who killed his mother and sister. During the flashback scenes we see with Henry, we're shown several key hints to his real identity. One is of course his extraordinary ability to see into people's minds, as well as his extremely powerful telekinesis. Henry also talks about his respect for Black Widow spiders, creatures that according to him are gods of the natural world, as they bring balance by culling the weak who would otherwise take over the world. In the same way that spiders uphold the balance of nature, he believes himself to be a god in his own right, while he looks down upon humanity as a type of vermin that needs to be culled. A bunch of dialogue later, we see Eleven defy him when he tries to talk her over to his side, and after a very intense psychic battle, Eleven throws him into a wall and basically tears him apart, as what I assume is his psychic energy spills into the physical world. Somehow, this insane amount of energy that collides between the two tears a hole through reality, which then leads to Henry falling into said hole. As we see Henry falling through reality, red lightning strikes his body and we see him start to transform into the very villain that we've come to fear this season. That's right, Vecna and Henry are the same person. Now what does this have to do with the mindflayer exactly? Well, as some of you know, the mindflayer was not just the main villain of season 2 and 3 of Stranger Things, but he has been stated to be the overarching main villain of the entire show. Now, saying that, if he's still the main villain of the show, why haven't we seen him at all through this season? Some of you might think that he's gone because of how the spider monster died when Eleven shut the big ass gate in season 3. The thing is, the spider monster was just a proxy, an avatar, for the mindflayer. So when it died, the Flayer was just cut off from it. Speaking of the spider monster, this brings us back to what Henry told us about its origins in this episode. He always had a respect and love for spiders. Not only was the huge fleshy monster in season 3 referred to as the spider monster, but the mindflayer himself has been described as a massive storm in the form of a spider. And looking at it, it's pretty evident that the mindflayer is basically a big shadow spider. You might be seeing where I'm going with this. When the group goes to Nancy's house, we also find out that the Upside Down is actually stuck in time, at exactly the same date as Eleven created the first gate through destroying Henry. Oh, and see this? It looks like these fleshy tentacles were created out of Henry and they get sucked in together with him into the Upside Down. And the one thing we know about the Upside Down is that it's an exact copy of our world, except that it's filled with fleshy tentacles and creatures. So, you may have seen this coming a mile away. But from what we've seen so far, we can assume that the reason to why we haven't seen the mindflayer at all this season is because Henry, or Vecna, is the mindflayer. This also makes sense when you just look at how he's designed. He constantly connects himself to these tentacles that allow him to not only feel everything in the Upside Down, but it also lets him see across dimensions. Possibly because of how far his tentacles have spread in the Upside Down. The tentacles also serve as a giant spider's web, again reflecting his philosophy on spiders. Now the question is, why didn't Vecna show up sooner? Well, we know that Eleven was the one who destroyed his physical body, so it would make sense that he simply feared what would happen if she found out that he was still alive. But in season 4, Eleven seemingly lost her powers, which meant that Vecna, or the mindflayer, could finally play his hand and use his real form, which undoubtedly seems to be more powerful than the shadowy apparition that is the mindflayer. Also, when Nancy gets transported to the empty pool where she sees Barb's lifeless body, we can hear Vecna taunting her that he remembers everyone he's killed. And if he is the one responsible for Barb's death, then that would make it even more obvious that he's in charge, because the Demogorgon that killed Barb was in that case under Vecna's control. Of course, all of this is not a guarantee. We still don't know if the Upside Down was created when Eleven destroyed Henry, or if she simply opened a gateway to it. Honestly, I'm more in the favor of the idea of it having always existed, and for some reason, I'm really hoping that the Mind Flayer is a whole separate entity and possibly even the one in charge in the Upside Down, as he was stated to be before. Dustin even states this hypothesis earlier in the episode, that the Mind Flayer is still in charge and that Vecna is like his general. And if there's one thing we've learned about Dustin, it's that nobody ever believes him, but he is always right. So, who knows? Maybe we'll see the Mind Flayer show up again in the final episodes of this season, but from where I'm sitting, it's possible that they're the very same being. But hey, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Have a good one. I'm out of here.